Welcome to the webinar for the Samsung Semiconductor DSA Automotive industry. Today, we'll be talking about the past, current, and future of the automotive industry. In today's agenda, we will give a quick introduction about panelists, a summary of the automotive industry and how it works, a current view of the industry, the future and strategic moves, and also Samsung Automotive and our capabilities. Starting with the introduction of the speaker today, my name is Candice. I'm the Product Marketing and Market Intelligence Manager for Samsung Memory Automotive. I sit in our San Jose office. I'm in charge of a lot of the product marketing and market sensing activities for this specific industry. And together with me, we have Mike Schultz as the speaker. Mike, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Mike Schultz, as Candice mentioned. I'm Senior Manager of Automotive Memory Sales for Samsung. I sit in our Detroit, Michigan office, and looking forward to talk and speaking with you all further.
All right, thank you. So let's start with some numbers. Why do we even care about automotive industry? What is the impact? I guess other than we need a car every day, it's actually a very important industry across different continent of the world. So within United States, the automotive industry account for 3 to 3.5% of the GDP. The revenue is around $985 billion. 12% of the manufacturing contribution comes from automotive. In the European Union, similar story, 7% of GDP. It's actually much higher, although the revenue itself is a little lower, but it's very, very big in the European Union economy. 13.8 million direct and indirect are employed within the automotive industry. So for China, another huge market, it's around 8 to 10% of the GDP, much higher in revenue, $1.58 trillion, and it's around 7.7% manufacturing contribution. And why we are talking about this is because Samsung plays huge role in the semiconductor market. So looking at the auto semiconductor market, the total revenue we expect to 2030 is around $164 billion in the auto semiconductor market. And within that, the memory space accounts for around 13.6%. It's still a very high growth market, around 17.3 CAGR from 2023 to 2030. And after learning basically the importance by the number of the automotive market as well as the automotive semiconductor market, let's dive into some of the questions we've prepared for today to kind of go over some of the innovations, the trends, and the changes that we are seeing within this industry. So the first question I have for Mike, can you talk a bit about the landscape of automotive supply chain, its tiered system, and the presence of these important players within the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Candice. So I think it's important to note that when we begin with the supply chain landscape, we're talking about a complex network that ties together raw materials, components, software platforms, services, logistics, and all of this network is intricately connected. And really, this trend is only increasing. So OEMs, of course, remain at the forefront. Companies that we're all well familiar with, such as Ford, GM, Stellantis, or many of the new EV entrants. Their role is to set platforms, technologies, the brand, and customer experience. But from there, we have the tier one suppliers. These companies design, manufacture complete systems, everything from infotainment, ADAS, powertrain, braking, wiring, etc. And really, they work hand in hand with OEMs from the first design review all the way into the system SOP on the OEM vehicle itself. These companies really have meaningful influence because they're engaged early and throughout the process with OEMs. When we move further down the chain, we have what we call tier two and tier three component suppliers. These companies provide semiconductors, sensors, or other precision parts that feed into those larger systems. When we look at it historically, these tiers have less leverage in vehicle development. They engage primarily at the purchasing phase, but the dynamic is changing rapidly. So especially as vehicles become more software defined, which we'll talk about more in the slides to come, these tier two and tier three suppliers are influencing architecture, features, and really the capabilities in all areas of development, partnering directly with OEMs and tier ones to co-develop solutions. So in the US, we're
Absolutely.
seeing these layers working simultaneously together. OEMs are investing in next-gen platforms, tier ones expanding into software and electronics, and technology companies stepping in the fold really to co-develop architectures and support validation and production.
Awesome, thank you. So basically, we're seeing this whole supply chain is pretty complex and is highly integrated. Each player basically have their own role within this supply chain system, but definitely things are changing. The bargaining power and the control or the influence from each of these tiers are basically changing because of how the auto development cycles are changing.
Yeah, exactly.
So moving on to second question, what is the overall sentiment in the area with so much change going on, right? And as a local expert sitting in Detroit, what are some trends you see in the areas now? Whether it's technology, business, and any trends you hear from really working closely with the local OEM and tier ones.
So I think overall the industry sentiment is optimistic and energized, really, especially here in Detroit and in the U.S. The U.S. automotive sector is really undergoing one of the most profound transformations in its history since really the start. And despite some headwinds that we've all seen recently, I think it's undeniable that the momentum is significant. We're in the US, we're seeing major investments in manufacturing, R&D, software, as I already mentioned. And some recent news is shown here on this slide, just really as a reference point to understand the investments and commitments that large major players are making in the US. There's speak and talk in the media of this new automotive corridor in the Midwest and Southeast, and that's real. Michigan, Ohio, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas. And there's not just vehicle assembly sites, they're hubs for advanced electronics, software engineering, digital services, and really semiconductor innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. On the West Coast as well, we see a lot more advanced technologies like autonomous driving, and then different policymakers are writing autonomous driving regularies into these policies. So I think it's a force to drive innovation forward within the auto space.
Yeah, I think that's clear.
Yeah, yeah. And then some of the other trends and innovations that we are seeing is also including the architecture transition, I believe you mentioned earlier, and then the autonomous driving that I mentioned a lot on the West Coast. Of course, East Coast, Detroit, I know GM, right? Ford, they all have their own division that's focusing on autonomous driving or advanced driving assistance system. And then also a lot more on integration and connectivity, whether it's, vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to satellites, and software defined solutions for, over the air software upgrades. So these are all things that we are seeing within the automotive space.
Yes, I think I can comment a little bit more on this, Candice, if you'd like.
Yeah.
So looking at these three trends, I think commenting on each, you know, uh, there is this dramatic shift from distributed ECUs to centralized zonal architecture, and that's well underway. Previously and formerly, and even really still today, many ECUs worked independently of each other with limited communications for each subsystems. And that is changing. It's moving now, it's moving into the future towards high performance zonal computing, consolidating into a handful of, high performance domain controllers. The
Mhm.
reason for this is more efficient use of computing power, more compute capacity, faster feature rollout, over-the-air updates, and software consistency, which then ties into, of course, the autonomous driving trend that we're seeing. This increasing level of autonomy, this increasing need for autonomous driving in the industry requires a complex mix of cameras, radar, sensors, and of course, as I mentioned, an ever increasing demand for computing power. So a resilient stack for robust autonomy depends on sensor fusion for detection accuracy, reducing sensor blind spots, and just requires a vast amount of computing power, high memory bandwidth, and really low latency for this to operate efficiently, I should say, in a real world setting. So OEMs are investing in this heavily in order to make it work, quite frankly, within the confines of safety requirements that all OEMs have and is at the forefront of their mind. And then looking on the right side, as you mentioned, Candice, integration and connectivity are what's turning into a car into a almost like a living platform. User experience, data, and business model innovation collide, and cars are becoming mobile endpoints in a digital ecosystem. So all of these points that are listed, whether it be vehicle to everything, telematics, data analytics, etc., it all feeds into that experience. And really cars are becoming not a separate machine to get you just from point A to point B. It's another aspect of your digital lives that's important as you utilize it every day.
So moving on to question 3. For the tier ones and suppliers, what are changes you see as they adopt to this new technology trends and market dynamics? I mean, they used to be pretty traditional. With all these new technology software requirements, it kind of requires a different set of capability and skill sets. Yeah, could you share a bit more on that end, what you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is really where we're seeing a large structural change in the industry. Suppliers are not simply manufacturing today's modules, they're evolving into platform providers, software service partners, and system integrators. But what's interesting is the automotive supply chain has actually adopted pretty quickly. The traditional model where suppliers specialize narrowly in one area, one domain, is giving way to strategic partnerships, vertical integration, and ecosystem building. And so some of these partnerships and initiatives are shown here, and we have them listed out just as a frame of reference. I think diving deeper into that a little more, if we look at partnerships and joint ventures, we're seeing OEMs and suppliers form alliances with software firms, AI companies, cloud providers, and really even non-traditional automotive players that we wouldn't be in the automotive industry typically familiar with.
Yep.
These alliances, the reason for that is they're helping to accelerate capability build out, share risk, and really fill gaps in software expertise or expertise that two sectors may not necessarily have shared in the past, that being technology industry and the automotive industry. If you look
Mhm.
at in the middle there with vertical integration, suppliers are no longer just tiered as we've mentioned before. They're increasingly moving up the stack. Vertical integration is accelerating. So all areas of this supply chain, OEMs, tier ones, they're designing compute modules, infotainment stacks, or ADAS systems, rather than just simple individualized components. They're they're building out their expertise. So this really changes their business model and their bargaining power. What's key here is that OEMs want to secure core differentiators, right? Whether that be the software stack, the battery chemistry itself, the user interface, it's all very important as OEMs want to differentiate and really define their area and their key benefits. Something I think I want to mention here and bring up is software-defined vehicles. So with software-defined vehicles, features become upgradable, software becomes monetizable over the vehicle's life cycle, and OEMs really are thinking, now and what we're seeing is, how do I create recurring revenue? How do I deliver these over-the-air updates? How do I enable new features post-launch? So again, elongating the life of the vehicle, but continuing to update and be able to provide new options within the vehicle that was not previously possible. And then I'll just touch on one more thing here on the right side is offshoring and supply chain resiliency. That's increasingly become a focus over the last few years. Global disruptions of the past few years really have driven home the need for a resilient domestic supply chain. And with that, the US is becoming and becoming a focus as a true EV and semiconductor hub with production localized in places in the US such as Georgia, Texas, Arizona, among many others. I think it's been all over the news, a hot button topic, but the effort is really to mitigate domestic regulatory changes and to mitigate international political challenges, right? It's to diversify critical materials and lock in long-term supply agreements for critical components and materials such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, exposure, etc. It's a theme here. The automotive industry is trying to become more strategic. It's becoming more interconnected and obviously much more technology driven.
So for very interesting that we have Tesla as an example showing here. They're probably the leader who does a very, very good job of vertical integration. They have in-house chip design. They have their own battery cell production. They also have their own infrastructure for charging. And I believe a few years ago, Ford CEO was saying like they have to manage hundreds of different ECUs and tier one suppliers. So they can't even control their own vehicle developments in a way. So Tesla setting this example are definitely moving the different OEMs into a different way of designing their vehicle. Their vehicle models come out, they can come up with a new vehicle refreshment within months, but traditionally it takes years. So it's definitely a game changer disruptor right here. Joint venture, right? If you look at different platform working together, the most recent announcement of Rivian and Volkswagen, they're trying to leverage their software capability, leveraging their EV design. It's a definitely interesting, dynamic changing space right now. Okay, so looking forward to the future. We've talked a lot about what's going on in the past, what's happening right now. So in the future, what are your predictions for the automotive supplier system in the next 5 to 10 years? I know it's hard. You don't have a crystal ball, but let's try it.
Yeah. So I think it's clear, sort of looping everything together, the next decade is definitely going to redefine the automotive supply chain as we know it. The old tiered structure, OEMs at the top, suppliers below is really flattening, and that's emerging. And what's emerging really is instead is a cross-industry, cross-value chain network where partnerships are critical, really more than that hierarchy. Looking at another area, as vehicles become more software defined, software will really be at the center of the shift or at the core of the shift. Semiconductors and software development will increasingly determine performance, safety, and user experience, not just the true mechanical design. So I think, with this, suppliers, this means differentiation will come, from premium specialized solutions, whether it's high performance memory for ADAS, or power efficient semiconductors for EV battery systems. Tier two, specifically or particularly semiconductor companies like Samsung will collaborate directly with OEMs and tier ones, co-designing architectures, optimizing performance, really from the silicon level up. As you mentioned, Candice, with a great example from Tesla. At a high level, OEMs now view technology as an extension of their brand identity. I think
Hmm.
that's clear.
Yeah.
As automakers want to control the end user experience, the data, the revenue streams that all come from these digital features, and that will only continue to increase as we move forward.
Yeah, so I put a very interesting quote on top. So from the Porsche CEO back in 2022, they realized that most Porsche drivers use iPhone. So the big question is how to make seamlessly connectivity without handling all the experience of Porsche pull it over to Apple, right? Because we even saw Apple, I believe in last year and years ago, they've announced that they are developing the iOS system for the car interface in infotainment, working with, vehicles that basically tells the battery condition, um, charging condition, and all different kind of condition within a car just through your phone. So it's a very interesting change or realization for OEMs. And then again, I think it's interesting that we were predicting the tier system to be flattening out. Also from Samsung's perspective, we're seeing that change from firsthand experience. All right, so we're covered for all the questions and we covered from the past, the current things that we are seeing that's happening within the space, and some of the future predictions that we boldly put together. Now, so why Samsung wants to kind of put together this webinar is really to show our dedication and our capabilities to support our customers within the automotive space. So Samsung Device Solution, we actually covers not only automotive, we are huge in PC and server. I believe this is probably something that mostly come to people's mind first when we hear Samsung devices. We also have DC enterprise, mobile. These are all areas that we cover. And we have a full spectrum of services from system LSI till memory, which Mike and I are a part of, and also foundry space that we are very proud of. We have our fabs located in Taylor, located in Austin, Texas. So we have a full spectrum of technology, manufacturing, and supportability for basically any need within different industries. And we also have a very strong operations across the United States. We are headquartered in San Jose. We have R&D in Folsom, Pasadena, San Diego, and like I mentioned earlier, we have different locations in Austin, Taylor, Houston, and most importantly, Detroit for our customers with that area. Mike is the senior sales manager in the Detroit office, and we actually also have a technical team within Detroit as well. So that is it for our webinar and talk today. Thank you so much for listening in, and thank you so much for sharing your wise information and also your thoughts with us, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Candice.